Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to getting well-informed fast. Today we're plunging into some really fascinating territory. It's quite a contrast, actually. Imagine first a chilling domestic murder mystery. You've got an artist, a crime, and this absolute wall of silence. Now hold that image and sort of set it next to this sprawling expose on global control. The second one alleges all sorts of things, manipulated reality, secret groups pulling strings. At first glance, you'd think, okay, these two things have nothing in common, but they both really drag us into these murky waters where hidden truths and warped perceptions are key.
Yeah, it's a stark difference in scale, isn't it? Our first source, it's a psychological thriller, really gets inside the head of Alicia Berenson. She's a painter, killed her husband, apparently, and then just stopped talking, completely silent. And we follow her psychotherapist, Theo Faber, who gets pretty obsessed with figuring her out. Then, the second source, it's nonfiction, and while it presents a very controversial view, it talks about a global cult, claims it orchestrates huge hoaxes. It specifically mentions COVID and climate change, using what it calls perceptual manipulation, FOSS. The goal, according to this source, is total human control, even touching on ideas like, reality being a simulation.
Wow. Okay. So very different styles, very different claims. And our mission today, just to be really clear up front, isn't about saying whether any of this is true or not. We're not endorsing anything here. We're just going to try and pull out the most important bits of information, the core ideas from both sources. We want to look at these big themes: silence, manipulation, reality.
Yeah.
What happens when what you perceive gets deliberately messed with? Whether that's happening to one person, like Alicia, or, as the second source suggests, maybe on a global scale. As we start digging in, what really jumps out at you first about this pairing?
For me, it's that micro versus macro view. You've got this incredibly intense personal psychological drama, and then you zoom out to this, frankly, almost unbelievable claim about global manipulation. It forces you to think about control and perception on completely different levels, but maybe there are connections.
Exactly. That potential connection is what makes it so interesting. So let's start with that individual mystery, the personal level, the silent patient. Tell us about Alicia Berenson.
Right. So Alicia is 33, a painter, married 7 years to Gabriel, who's a fashion photographer. The basic setup, as the book presents it, is she shot him, killed him. But the thing that grabs everyone, the media, the public, is her silence afterwards. Immediate, total, unwavering silence. She just refuses to speak.
It reminds me of that Freud quote mentioned in the source, something like, no mortal can keep a secret. If his lips are silent, he chatters with his fingertips. Betrayal oozes out of him at every pore. Her silence feels like it's screaming something, even if she's not talking.
Exactly. It becomes her statement, in a way. Even when she's charged, nothing. Mute. But she does make one kind of statement. While she is under house arrest, she paints something called Alcestis. It's described as a naked self-portrait, and she's used a blood-red paintbrush. Pretty stark. And what's interesting is how people reacted. The source notes some saw pure evil, others saw a cold-blooded bitch. It really highlights how subjective interpretation is, even when faced with this artifact of the crime.
Yeah, everyone projects onto it. Okay, so into this silence steps Theo Faber, the psychotherapist. He's 42, and the book is quite blunt, saying he became a therapist because he himself was, quote, fucked up.
Right. He talks about surviving his own psychic darkness, and therapy helped him. So when he hears about Alicia potentially being institutionalized, he has this moment of connection, thinking, there but for the grace of God. He feels this pull, this empathy maybe, or perhaps obsession is a better word. He feels he can reach her.
So his own past really drives him.
Definitely. He gets a job at the Grove, which is this secure psychiatric unit where Alicia ends up. And the source doesn't shy away from describing the place. Theo sees some pretty shocking things right off the bat. Patients acting out self-harm suicide attempts. It sounds intense.
Yeah, sounds like a tough environment.
Very. The director there, Professor Diomedes, he's described as unorthodox, apparently uses music therapy, things like that.
And had Diomedes tried to treat Alicia?
Yes, he had. And failed. The source says he called her a silent siren who just destroys any therapeutic ambition. But Theo's determined. He thinks he can be the one. Even when his colleague, Christian, basically tells him he's crazy, saying, Alicia won't talk in 6 weeks or 60 years, you're wasting your time, Theo won't back down.
He's really set on breaking through that silence. How does he plan to do it?
His main hope seems to lie in her diary. He manages to get hold of it, and it becomes this crucial window, he thinks, into her mind.
Ah, the diary. What does it reveal?
Well, initially it talks about her fear before the murder. She writes about seeing a mysterious man watching her house. Tall, built, sunglasses, cap. The inscription creates this sense of dread. She feels an icy shiver of fear.
Okay, so she felt threatened beforehand.
Yeah. And she mentions her neighbor, Barbie Hellman, who actually confirmed her fears, suggesting it could be a burglar or even a rapist. And Alicia's reaction to this validation is interesting. She felt relieved and grateful that someone was taking me seriously.
That is strange. Relief that someone believes your terror.
It points to something else, doesn't it? And adding to her frustration, according to the diary, was Gabriel, her husband. He apparently didn't fully believe her concerns or downplayed them, which the diary says annoyed her and made her angry. That feeling of not being heard.
So there's Alicia's hidden world in the diary, and meanwhile, Theo's got his own stuff going on, right?
Oh, absolutely. The narrative cuts back and forth. We learn Theo discovers his own wife, Kathy, is having an affair. He finds emails. He feels like he's been living with a stranger. It hits him hard.
Wow. So he's dealing with betrayal himself while trying to treat Alicia.
Exactly. And his own therapist, Ruth, helps him connect this feeling, this pain of not being loved, back to his childhood, his father. There's also this interesting bit where Kathy calls herself nuts, but Theo sees her as the least crazy person I'd ever known. Again, that gap between self-perception and how others see you.
Okay, this is all building layers of psychological complexity. But
Yeah.
then, the twist. You mentioned a twist from the diary.
Yes. This is where everything flips. Part 5 of Alicia's diary. It reveals that Theo Faber was the man stalking her.
What? Wait, the therapist was the stalker.
Yes. According to her diary entry, he broke into their house, tied her up first, and then waited for Gabriel. And the chilling detail is how she recognized him later as her therapist. His eyes, his smell, but also his exact phrase. He'd apparently said to the stalker figure, "I want to help you. I want to help you see clearly." And then as her therapist, he uses the same words.
Oh my God, that's deeply disturbing.
It is. And she writes that she realized he knew she'd recognized him. She saw fear in his eyes. So her silence, her supposed catatonia. Maybe it wasn't just trauma. Maybe it was strategy, self-preservation.
She was pretending, maybe. Or part of it was real, part was a defense against him.
The source leaves it a bit ambiguous, but the implication is her silence becomes a weapon, or at least a shield, once she recognizes him. And then things escalate. Theo finds Alicia after she seems to have overdosed. He tries to make it look like someone else is responsible to cover his tracks.
He's actively manipulating the situation in the hospital.
Yes. And then Alicia has this violent outburst. Another patient, Elif, tells Alicia that Theo is in love with her. And Alicia snaps. She attacks Elif, plunging a paintbrush into her eye. It's brutal, and it directly mirrors her painting, Alcestis, and the original violence. It's like her contained knowledge finally explodes outwards.
Wow. Okay, that is a journey, a
Yeah.
really dark, twisty journey into individual psychology, trauma, and manipulation. So holding that in our minds, that intense personal level of deceit, let's pivot. Let's go to the other extreme with this second source, the global cult.
Right. Complete shift in scale and, frankly, in the nature of the claims. The core idea here is that humanity is being controlled by a secretive global cult and their main tool, perceptual manipulation.
Perceptual manipulation. How does the source define that?
It argues that much of what we experience is shaped by this cult. It even defines fear with an acronym, false emotion appearing real. The idea is that fear is manufactured. It's a perception they create and use.
Okay, and how do they supposedly do that? What are the mechanics?
The source outlines a couple of key techniques. One is called problem reaction solution, or PRS. The claim is they create a problem, or maybe just the illusion of one, whip up public reaction fear, outrage, blame it on some scapegoat, and then offer a solution. And that solution, naturally, is something that advances their agenda, changes society in the way they want it all along.
Right, create the crisis to sell the predetermined response.
Exactly. And the other technique mentioned is the totalitarian tiptoe, TT. This is described as a more gradual process. Little steps, chipping away at freedoms, always demanding more control in the name of getting things back to normal. But normal keeps shifting.
Oh, okay, those are the alleged methods. How does the source apply these ideas? You mentioned COVID earlier.
Yes, the COVID hoax, as the source explicitly calls it, is presented as a prime example of PRS in action. The central claim is that COVID was a psyop, a psychological operation. It alleges a deadly virus that didn't actually exist was used to terrify people globally.
Didn't exist. That's a huge claim. How does the source support that?
Well, it focuses heavily on the testing. It claims the RT-PCR test was fundamentally misused. It cites the inventor, Kary Mullis, supposedly saying it cannot detect infectious disease. The argument is that by running the test with too many cycles over amplification, they could produce vast numbers of illusory cases and attribute deaths to COVID that weren't caused by it.
So manipulate the data via the testing method.
That's the allegation. And the concept of asymptomatic carriers is also highlighted. The source argues this was a crucial invention because it allowed them, quote, for the first time to justify quarantining, house arresting healthy people. Breaking precedent.
Okay. And what about the vaccines? What does the source say there?
It's highly critical, to say the least. It asserts the vaccines aren't traditional vaccines. It claims they only got emergency approval because trials weren't finished, and links them to extremely severe outcomes using terms like genocide and human annihilation.
Those are incredibly strong words. Does it offer any mechanism for how the vaccines supposedly cause harm?
Yes, and this is where it gets even more unconventional. It mentions claims of nanobots inside the vaccines, the alleged purpose, connecting people to a future smart grid, altering DNA, turning humans into synthetic cyborgs. It even suggests the possibility that these vaccines could interact with Wi-Fi, receiving or transmitting signals, energy, messages.
Wow. Okay. That's moving into some pretty radical technological and biological territory.
Definitely. And it doesn't stop there. The source also alleges widespread death certificate fraud. The claim is that many deaths, especially among the elderly in care homes, were wrongly attributed to COVID-19. It suggests this wasn't about protection, but that, quote, old people were not being protected, they were being called murdered in truth. It even claims hospitals were often empty despite media narratives of being overwhelmed.
Goodness. And does it name names? Who does it say is behind all this?
Oh, yes. It points fingers directly. Bill Gates is described as a psychopath and cult gopher, highlighting his funding of the WHO. Klaus Schwab from the World Economic Forum, associated with the Great Reset, is named. Anthony Fauci, Christian Drosten, the German virologist involved with the PCR test protocol, Neil Ferguson, known for epidemiological modeling. They're all presented as key figures facilitating this alleged agenda.
So it's portraying a coordinated effort by powerful individuals and organizations. Beyond these big hoaxes, how does the source claim this cult maintains day-to-day control over people's minds?
It suggests the manipulation starts early. Perceptual programming, it calls it, beginning in childhood through the education system. Children who don't conform, who resist, might be labeled problem children, possibly medicated with drugs like Ritalin.
Conditioning from a young age.
Yes, and it applies psychological concepts like Stockholm Syndrome on a societal level. The idea is that populations, like captives, can start to bond with their abusers, their controllers. Some people, it suggests, become the most vehement defenders of the system that's oppressing them.
That's a disturbing thought. Does it mention specific groups involved in this manipulation?
It does. It talks about an organization called Common Purpose. Describes it as a hidden virus, training people in leadership positions to be loyal to the cult's directives, not necessarily to the public they serve. It alleges they use techniques like NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, to subtly alter personalities and specifically recruit psychopaths and narcissists because they're easier to control or align with the agenda.
Okay. And any others?
Yes. It also mentions the Behavioral Insights Team, sometimes known as the Nudge Unit, specifically SPIB in the UK context. This group is presented as using behavioral science advice to steer public perception and behavior, primarily by cultivating fear and encouraging social disapproval, basically peer pressure against anyone who doesn't comply with official narratives.
Right, using psychology to manage the population. What about something like masks? Does the source touch on those?
It does, quite pointedly. It claims mandatory mask wearing is a technique borrowed from mind control programs, like the CIA's MKUltra. The alleged purpose is depersonalization, making people feel less like individuals, more anonymous, more compliant. It also links masks to various health issues, microplastics, and even claims people found strange black fibers in them.
It really weaves together a lot of disparate anxieties and claims into this one narrative.
It certainly does, and Silicon Valley plays a big role in this alleged control web, too. Major tech companies, Facebook, Google, Amazon, Twitter, are described as cult-owned. It argues they have more power than many countries and use censorship aggressively to suppress dissenting views and control the information landscape.
Okay, so we have alleged psychological manipulation, specific organizations, tech censorship, and then you mentioned something even stranger earlier, Wittico archons.
Yes, this is where the source moves beyond the purely physical or psychological into the metaphysical or maybe even esoteric. It introduces the concept of Wetiko, This is described as a kind of mind virus, borrowing from Native American traditions, apparently. It's seen as an evil spirit or a frequency distortion, it uses the term Yaldabaoth frequency distortion, that feeds on negative, low-vibration energy like fear and anger. It manifests, the source claims, as a profound lack of empathy, extreme rage. It even gives woke ideology as an example of Wetiko manifestation.
A mind virus feeding on negativity.
Oh?
And the archons.
The archons are presented as non-human entities. The source draws on Gnostic ideas here, I believe. They're described sometimes as serpentine, sometimes like the typical gray aliens. They supposedly operate from unseen realms, influencing human consciousness. The human cult agents, the Gateses, the Schwabs, are seen as acting under the influence of or channeling these archons.
So there's a non-human element driving this, according to the source.
That's the claim. And this leads to arguably the most radical idea presented, the simulation theory. It posits that our entire physical reality isn't base reality. It's a holographic simulation, maybe a bad copy, created by these archons to trap our consciousness. It even mentions the speed of light as being like the processing limit or the boundary wall of this simulation.
Wow. From a murder mystery to questioning the fundamental nature of reality itself. That's quite the arc.
It really is. But the source doesn't end on a note of complete despair. It does offer a path for resistance.
Oh, what does it suggest?
It calls for renegade minds, people who refuse to comply, who see through the alleged manipulation. Resistance through noncompliance is key. But interestingly, it also emphasizes the power of laughter. It states that Wetiko does not know what to do in the face of laughter. That positive, high-vibration energy disrupts the control system.
Laughter as resistance. That's an interesting angle. Okay, so we've unpacked both sources. The intense personal manipulation in the silent patient and this vast controversial theory of global manipulation in the global cult. How do we, what are the connections here? What does putting these two together suggest?
Well, the most obvious parallel is the theme of manipulation driven by hidden motives. Theo manipulates Alicia, seemingly driven by his own trauma and desire for control, maybe even a twisted form of helping. The second source alleges a global cult manipulates everyone, driven by a desire for total control, possibly influenced by these non-human entities. In both cases, there's a hidden truth, Theo's guilt, the cult's agenda that motivates extreme actions impacting others' reality.
And the role of perception is central in both, isn't it? Because what Alicia perceived before the murder real was the stalker real or imagined trauma. It turned out he was real, but her perception was doubted. And the second source just takes that idea and blows it up to cosmic scale. Is our reality real, or is it perceptual programming?
Yeah.
Is it a simulation?
Exactly. It forces you to ask, how much of our reality is constructed, either by our own minds dealing with trauma, like perhaps Alicia initially, or by external forces, as Theo did to her, or as the second source claims the cult does to us all.
And secrets. The power of secrets and silence.
Yes. That Freud quote again, secrets wanting to get out, Alicia's powerful silence, the alleged secret societies and hidden agendas of the cult. Hidden information, whether personal trauma or a global conspiracy theory, holds immense power in both narratives.
It's also striking how Theo's phrase to Alicia, "I want to help you see clearly," echoes the second source's call.
It really does. Theo uses it as a tool of manipulation while being the cause of her confusion. The second source uses a similar idea, urging people to see through all this bullshit, to become renegade minds, to connect the dots and perceive the real patterns. It's the same desire to see clearly, but positioned entirely differently. One is manipulation, the other is liberation.
So wrapping this up, we've journeyed through two incredibly different worlds in this deep dive. One intensely personal and psychological, the other vast, conspiratorial, even metaphysical. Both are obsessed with control, with perception, with hidden truths shaping our lives. From Alicia locked in her silence, her own psychological prison partly built by Theo, to this alleged global matrix of manipulation presented in the second source. It's clear that reality, or how we perceive it, might be far more complex, far more malleable than we usually think.
Absolutely. And that leaves us, and you, the listener, with a pretty provocative thought to chew on. If we take the second source's more radical claims seriously, just for a moment, the simulation, the archons, the Wetiko mind virus, if the systems we trust are, as it suggests, potentially designed to keep us compliant, maybe even unawakened, what does it even mean to truly know anything for sure? And flipping that around, what kind of radical act, what kind of renegade mind thinking might it take for you to genuinely step outside the programmed normal, whatever that is for you, and start actively reshaping your own reality instead of just letting it be shaped